Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Massive matchup, Alabama on the road in Tennessee. And we kind of talked about this game Sunday afternoon. It just feels like this football game comes down to what team do you trust more? Because you look at both Tennessee and Alabama and say, we've seen national championship caliber football from both of these teams, but both of these teams enter this football game with aspects that you really have massive question marks heading into Saturday. Want to get into what do we trust from both of these teams? What do we have question marks? What do we not trust from both of these football teams? Fired up to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, Alabama fans, Tennessee fans, let it fly in the comment section. I think there are so many different ways that you can look at this football game. And I know a lot of y'all might not agree with some of these takes, and that's kind of the beauty of doing this. So let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, let's get rid of this. Let's talk about this depth chart, kind of get into these teams, and let's start with Tennessee. A Tennessee team that, Dill, you go back 3 weeks ago, we were both banging the table as like one of the best teams in the country. That I believe you at one point said they were your pick to win the national championship. All of a sudden, that Arkansas game, all of a sudden that Florida game where Tennessee just doesn't look like the Tennessee team we saw to start the season. Let's start with the question marks that we have with Tennessee. Dill, I feel like it's pretty obvious heading in this football game. The biggest question mark, the biggest thing you don't trust about this Tennessee team, what do you got for us?
I mean, it's got to be Nico, right? And it's not like he's playing bad in general, but he
Yeah.
has leaving way too many throws on the field that you just can't leave. I mean, we look though. Would you just read me a stat that he's 1 for 9 in the last 2 games in completing passes over 30 yards? I think it is. And the frustrating part about that stat is those throws are there. They're not really hard throws. Guys are kind of open. Heupel's done his thing in terms of getting those matchups and making them happen, and he's just leaving them on the field. If they hit 5 of those throws, let's say instead of 1, they probably win both those games relatively easily.
That's been the thing for me too. When you look at what's so important to this Tennessee offense, go back to 2022. We know Josh Heupel, especially against an Alabama secondary that's been blowing some coverages, and we're going to get to Alabama in the next couple of minutes. You got a feeling that some of these the throws are going to be there. You kind of just know that at some point, guys are going to be open downfield, and it's 20 plus yards down the field. He's 1-9 the last 2 games, 20 plus yards down the field. Nico's got to hit it. And Dill, I think the frustrating conversation with Nico is we know what this kid is capable of. And I know there's going to be people saying, like, oh, Joe Milton vibes. Yeah, we Michigan fans, we know about Joe Milton. The thing with Joe Milton is he kind of proved that throughout his college football career that he wasn't a very consistent passer. You go back to Nico at the high school ranks. We've been following this kid since his sophomore year in high school. We know he can be a consistent passer that can consistently make those kind of throws.
Nico's
To kind
also
of,
only in his like 6th, 7th start. I mean, it's obviously only his second year. Joe Milton
yeah.
last year was year 5, so there is like that element. Like you can grow. Like this isn't the finished Nico. I think that's important to keep in mind at some level.
And I just talked about Kay Klubnik and the development you saw Kay Klubnik have. It's not crazy to believe that Nico kind of takes those steps as well. And you can also just chalk it to like, hey, I didn't play great football the last couple of games.
Because you're also
The
seeing some really good football for like that Oklahoma game.
oh,
Like he was hitting the throws he needed to hit. For parts of that Florida game, he was hitting like some really nice throws, especially in more of that intermediate range. So again, you're seeing some of the things you really like to see. But again, those throws that are there down the field, they need to be automatic, just like they kind of were with Hendon Hooker when that Tennessee offense was
and
unstoppable.
like again, I think the positive is this kid can do it. Dale, we're Michigan fans. Like we can wish all we want that the Michigan quarterbacks are going to turn the light. There's no light to turn on for Michigan quarterbacks. Like there's a big and bright light for Nico that can get turned on. You just want him to turn it on Saturday against Alabama. Now, getting to the things that you trust, because you look at this Tennessee team and there's been aspects of Tennessee that you really trust. I'll start first, the run game. And like sticking on the offensive side of the football, this Tennessee rushing attack, which is something they want to do. The biggest misconception about Josh Heupel is that he's an air raid guy, wants to throw the football around the yard. Yes, he's going to spread you out, but he's going to want to run the football. Dill, this offensive line, although maybe struggled in pass protection the last 2 weeks, has been really, really good running the football. Dylan Sampson, one of the best backs, not only in the SEC, but in the country. That type of thing, especially when you have a quarterback that's maybe trying to find some confidence, it matters. And we just saw Alabama really struggle with two two quarterbacks in Diego Pavia and Lenore Sellers that can be athletes.
Well,
So you
right.
look at
Don't you think Tennessee can add more of that Nico run game into their offense? Because you see, like, I think you saw it a little bit against Florida, obviously. I think they have that. And I think that style, you're right, it has put some pressure on Alabama. It slowed their linebackers down. They haven't looked as comfortable. So, again, I think, can you get him into a rhythm and let him use his legs maybe a little more than you did? Because at the end of the day, I get kind of not doing it against NC State and some of those teams you were beating the doors off of, but
yep.
this is a game you probably want to use every bullet in the chamber, if you will. And a big part of that, I think, is Nico's running ability because it's there and they can hit
And you
places.
can be smart with it. Like Joe Millen, it's like, all right, you ain't throwing the football that good. You're 250 pounds. Like, you can take some hits, big dog. Nico, you probably don't want to be taking 15 plus hits in a football game, but he's too good of an athlete to just not have him be an athlete running the football. Now, another thing you trust with Tennessee here is the defense and specifically the front seven. And again, a huge misconception is it is led by James Pierce, but he's not nearly the only NFL caliber dude in this front seven, specifically on the defensive line. Dill, I'm not to get too much into Alabama because we're going to talk about Alabama in just a little bit. You got to think, and it's going to be an interesting balance because you want to get after Jaylen Miller, but you don't want him to burn you outside of the pocket. That Tennessee pass rush, which I think is one of the best pass rush units that you see in the country, how do they get after Jaylen Miller? How do they affect Jaylen Miller, but also keep him in the pocket and avoid letting Jaylen be that difference maker outside of the pocket that we've seen him do plenty over his Alabama career?
And that feels like what a little bit is different about this Tennessee team is they're rushing with all four. It's not just a James Pierce show. It's not just them rushing a couple guys
Yeah,
out like James
yeah.
Pierce and Tyler Barron winning on the edge and no one else really making it happen. I mean, Bryce Neeson's doing a lot of good things. Omar Norman Lott, Elijah Simmons, like those guys are making plays in the pass rush and doing some nice things. So I think when you rush as a group and your four are winning their matchups, I think you have a much better chance against those scrambling quarterbacks because you can keep them in the pocket and then you can especially get them down and not let them leak out. So I think the fact that all four of them are rushing at a higher level has probably increased your level of
And
comfortability with this.
I also think like the diversity in terms of how these edge rushers get after the passer. Like when you're dealing with the really twitchy, bendy pass rusher that can only win on the outside shoulder of tackles, then it gets relatively easy to break the pocket because you know that edge rusher is just winning upfield. You have guys like James Pierce who, yeah, he can win like that, but he can also win right through the body of an offensive tackle and kind of collapse that pocket around the quarterback as opposed to making it really easy for the quarterback to get outside the pocket. I think that's kind of another storyline to keep an eye on.
And I
I'm going to
also
circle.
think you play some games with them up front because you saw even against that South Carolina team,
Oh,
like
oh
they
yeah.
were leaving guys unblocked. That was the frustrating part about Alabama. And like we can probably start diving into what you don't trust at times about Bama is their tackles are actually playing good football when they're blocking the right guy. I think Proctor and Pritchett have made some major strides in terms of their physical ability, but they're giving up some free runs, some of those plays where you don't even give Jaylen Miller a chance to break the pocket. And
It
those kind of killed him against South Carolina.
so incredible. Like you go into that football game saying, all right, where's Kyle Kennard every single snap? And there was multiple times in that football game where Kyle Kennard's rushed a free runner. Like nobody's even picking him up. I think you said it best. Like the talent level for Alabama on the offensive line, they are playing pretty dang good. But as a unit, in terms of the command, I don't know if it's on Jalen Milroe. I don't know if it's on the new center Parker Brailsford. I don't know whose it's on, but it's been a problem, especially against South Carolina, where look, South Carolina's got a really good front seven. And when Alabama knew what they were doing and were blocking their assignments, I thought the pass protection was actually pretty dang good. But the biggest problem was like the communication and letting free runners up. That was a problem. And so that definitely goes under something you don't really trust about Alabama. Now, I think the
And
second
the
thing,
issue is when you have that, your guy is Jalen Milroe. I personally think he's playing like the best college football quarterback or quarterback in college football right now. And they need to let him do his thing. And that, again, for the most part against South Carolina, it was fine. He was running the ball well. He was making good throws. But again, when they get him very uncomfortable, you still saw some old Jalen Milroe stuff, throwing interceptions,
that's true.
taking safety,
Yeah.
those type of things. So again, this offensive line needs to be relatively dialed because if they let Jalen Miller kind of play his game, you saw how dangerous he can be. I mean, he was killing Georgia for that first half. He's killed almost everyone he's played. I mean, he's really dominating games. And that's at a level
It
that,
kind of
again,
makes you nervous though, because you start thinking about this and say you're going on the road to Knoxville. Like that's not exactly a friendly environment to set up pass protection and hear the snaps and hear the pass protection calls. Yeah, that's something that definitely concerns you heading in this football game. I think the other like blatant thing you don't trust right now is I'm not even going to say the Alabama defense. I'm just going to say Coach Womack. Like, man, this Alabama defense is just the last what 2 quarters at Georgia, in the last 8 quarters against Vandy and South Carolina combined. This Alabama defense is like flat out just been underwhelming. And I know the box score might not necessarily reflect a horrible game against South Carolina. Deal that South Carolina offense shouldn't be going for 375 total yards. This Alabama, like we're looking at the depth chart, multiple guys that will be playing in the NFL in 12 months. It's just not playing up to the standard. And I don't like, look, if I knew the answer to it, like I wouldn't be sitting in my basement talking about college football on my laptop. I'd be out there coaching for Alabama. Now you look at it and my biggest problem for Alabama is like, what's their identity? Like they tried to play a lot of man coverage against Vandy, got absolutely toasted, went to a little bit more zone against South Carolina, didn't necessarily work that well. Like there were some guys running wide open. And I get that it's like, all right, you got a new safety in Keon Sabb. You got a true freshman in Xavier Brown playing. You got a true freshman in Jaylen Miller, new cornerback in Damani Jackson. There's either freshmen or new faces that are in the secondary. Combine that with the new defensive coaching staff. But at the end of the day, there's just not an identity to this Alabama defense. And as a
And I think
result,
that rears its head on like those big situations where you need to play good ball. I mean, third down has just been a disaster. You heard Kane Womack talk about it in his press conference if you
yeah,
listened to it this week. And it didn't sound like he really had a great answer. He kind of gave the old like boilerplate, oh, it's just execution. It's like, well, that's your job. You got to get these guys rolling because the frustrating part is it was working first and second down against South Carolina. If they just could translate that into those third down moments and not play terrible in those situations, South Carolina doesn't score that many points. So again, I think obviously the talent's there. You look, two of the better linebackers in the country, I think, really solid
yeah,
interior line. They just have to be better on third down in those big money situations. They're
yeah,
not being.
and the communication again, like if you're not on your P's and Q's against this Tennessee offense, like you're gonna get diced up. Like Josh Heupel's gonna know how to scheme up against you.
Well, and that's where it comes down to him being able to hit those blitzes.
That feels like where this game comes down to. Like Nico's gonna have throws to make. Is he gonna make them? Is he gonna play at a high level? That just seems like where this game is kind of the outcome lies in. The thing that you trust about Alabama, Dill, I'm kind of with you. You mentioned it earlier. Outside of like Cam Ward at Miami, like is their quarterback playing better than Jalen Milroe? I don't
Cam
think
Ward's
so.
not playing better than
And
Jalen, but fine.
debatable. We don't that's for another day. You look at you look at Jalen Miller, the biggest step that he's taken. I think there's two things I've noticed. One, he's just playing, he's not thinking, and that's credit to Kalen DeBoer. Like they've created an offense where it perfectly suits how Jalen Miller wants to play. Where you look at times in 2023 where they struggled, it seemed like they were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, so to speak. They were trying to fit Jalen Milroe into an offense that didn't really suit him. This year it's different. I think secondly, like this kid just got better, especially in the intermediate passing attack. Like you go back to last year and say if he wasn't throwing the football 20 plus yards down the field, he wasn't that good of a passer. You look at 10 to 20 yards down the field, that intermediate range, something he really struggled with in 2023, only a 52% completion percentage. You take a look halfway through 2024, that number's up to 68%. He's been money in those short intermediate passing concepts. That's kind of the hole in his game in 2023. You talk about the thing I trust most, and it's the most important thing to trust, quarterback play. Like you trust it for Alabama heading into this matchup.
And that's where it gets interesting. Like again, at the end of the day, I look, the matchup is kind of what it is. Like good on the defense or Tennessee's defense
That's
versus good
yeah.
Alabama offense, and not so good on very good in the other side. So
And I don't
it's
know if
kind of,
that made sense. I'm going to
no,
clarify for
because I
everybody.
definitely the second part was off. The first
I
part I
was
was on.
you confusing me too. Go on. Sorry.
No, you got a really good offense in Alabama playing a really good defense
There
in
we go.
Tennessee. And then
Crushed
you
it.
got an offense in Tennessee that's struggling against the defense in Alabama that's really good or not very good.
Oh boy. So, I think we all know what you're trying to say here. It's late Wednesday night for the kid here. Apparently, Dill, I'm with you. And it to me it seems like what unit can exploit the weaknesses of the other unit the best. That's probably how you win this football game. Dill, you took Alabama because you trust Jaylen Miller. I took Tennessee because I think if you can run the football, play good defense, you can win football games at home. It's a toss up. I think everybody's really excited for this football game. And what I hope most is we just see national championship football. Like you go back to Oregon, Ohio State. That's kind of how we talked about that game. And I thought you saw both teams play really good football. And as college football fans, we got a really good game. I'm hoping that's what we get in Knoxville on Saturday. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.